What's going on, everybody? It's Barmine from Barmine Tech, and today we're going to be talking about setting up PiHole on a Raspberry Pi. So it's been a while since we worked with PiHole, and on top of that, a few weeks ago I did some must-have LXC containers, and in there I talked about how I run two PiHole LXC containers for redundancy. And so I did mention that being that they're running on the same host, it really means there's no redundancy if the host goes down, which is very true, and that's why it got me to thinking. And I said maybe I'll run it on a actual Raspberry Pi again. Today we're going to be working with this Raspberry Pi 5, and that's just because I have it handy. You can run this on a Raspberry Pi 4, a 3, a 0, a 02W, pretty much almost any of the boards, and then you could also run it on some other stuff, but today I'm going to be focused on Raspberry Pis. I'm going to be using Pi 5, like I said, because I have one available. It just happens to be sitting on the shelf, and because it has the onboard NIC, and I really like having that because I get to hardwire this into my network. If you work with one of the Pi Zeros, it's only over Wi-Fi, and this could lead to some latency or some Wi-Fi communication issues. Lately, I really haven't been a big fan of Wi-Fi because it's nothing but issues, but that's a side note. Like I said, today we're going to be going over how to set up PiHole, how to set up the Raspberry Pi for PiHole, and go through that whole process of setting up PiHole for your home network, your home lab, whatever you want to use it for. So let's get right into it. Start off, if you're not familiar, we're going to talk about PiHole a little bit. It's pretty much just a DNS sinkhole, so you can set it as the DNS server for your router or specific host if you want, and it's just going to work to block ads, malicious sites, block sites maybe you don't want people on the network to go to, stuff like that. It also can function as a DHCP server, which we will talk about a bit today. We have some nice dashboards to look at to kind of take a look at the data, see what's being blocked, and break it down a little bit more. How I was saying earlier, how we can block certain sites, or we can make sure certain sites are whitelisted. We can look at all the data, but we're going to talk about this more. I just wanted to talk about what PiHole is. Like I mentioned, you're going to need a Raspberry Pi for this project or something similar. And another thing you're going to need is a micro SD card. So I know it's going to be really hard to see this because it is a micro SD card. But to image it with a Raspberry Pi, we're going to use what's called Raspberry Pi Imager. So you're going to need to download this as well. So you're going to need to download Raspberry Pi Imager. And now using a tool like this, which is a USB to micro SD converter or adapter, you can plug this into a USB drive and write to the SD card. So once you get this all downloaded, then we can open it up and start working. And that's what I'm going to do right now. So I just put my SD card into the adapter, and it does have data on it previously. So the first thing I want to do is erase that data, and we can do that using the Raspberry Pi Imager. So what we're going to do is click over to Choose OS, and we're going to scroll all the way down to Erase, and this is where we can erase and format the SD card. Now we're going to select our storage, and over here we can select our SD card. Now if you have multiple maybe USB storage devices plugged in, like you have an external hard drive, just be mindful so you don't format that. So just make sure you're selecting the right device. And we're going to click Next. It's going to format. We're going to click Yes again, and you can see you'll get a message saying that it's all set and we can remove it. Now what we're going to do is install the operating system. So there's a couple ways you could do it. You can either come over here and select by device. So I am working with a Pi 5, so I'm going to select that. And now we're going to come over here and choose an OS. Now when it comes to the operating systems, we're going to want to make sure that it's something that's supported for the project. So PiHole does have their supported systems. And the first one that they list, Raspberry Pi OS. So this is the formerly Raspbian. If you're a long-time Raspberry Pi user, this is what it used to be called at least 5-6 years ago when I started working with Raspberry Pis. We have some other options. You could use plain old Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora, or CentOS, but for today, I'm going to work with Raspberry Pi OS. I'm going to open up the Imager again. Now, there's a graphical version, like a GUI, or there's the server version, or like a CLI-driven version, and that's what I want to work with, just so it's more lightweight. So to get that, we're going to come over to Raspberry Pi OS Other. And now over here, we can select Raspberry Pi OS Lite 64-bit. You can see it marks off that it's compatible with 3, 4, 400, and 5. Those are the different Pi models, so I'm just going to select that. Again, we're going to select our storage. I'm going to click Next. It's going to ask if I want to configure any settings off the rip, and you can come over here to edit settings. So what we can do in here by editing the settings for the install is we can have it so it configures to a Wi-Fi network, or we can enable SSH by default. So we can actually try to run this as a headless unit just to make the setup a little bit easier. So I'm just going to fill in some of this information like the host name. I'm going to set a username and password. configure my Wi-Fi, and then we're going to go from there. Another thing that we can do over here is enable SSH, and then we can use password authentication. So this will just use the default password that we set for the host name. And then if you want, you can allow public key authentication only. It's only a local server, so I don't think we really need a public key authentication. And then finally, there's just these options to let you know when it's done. It's whatever with default, so I'm just going to click save. And now over here, we're going to click yes to start it. And we're going to let this run, so I'm just going to click yes, and then we'll be back when it's all done. It's going to get windows like this where it's going to open up Explorer and maybe say insert a disk. That's fine, just let it work in the background. After the OS is all done writing, it'll have a pop-up, but I clicked and closed it by accident. It'll eject the SD card, and then you can take that out and put that into the Raspberry Pi. And my Raspberry Pi came up. As you can see, I was able to look in my router's network map and be able to get the IP for mine. You could do something similar, or maybe use Angry IP Scanner. I'm just going to log in, and I was able to get into my Pi. First thing I'm going to do is do a sudo apt update. And like I was saying, the Raspbian OS is very similar to Ubuntu, so a lot of the commands are going to match up. See, we're looking pretty good, so I'm going to do a sudo apt upgrade tac-y. I'm just going to do tac-wide so I don't need to press yes afterwards. I'm going to let this run through, and it should be done pretty quickly. While this works, I'm just going to start getting the guide over here for installing it ready. So you can see if we come over to prompt 2, it says to install PiHole. The install is very simple. It's just a couple commands, and then we're going to go through some menus. This should be finishing up in a minute. So once this is all finished up, we're going to get into the setup. So my upgrade was all done. One little trick I want to show just in case you might be new to Raspberry Pi, and if you are running the Raspbian OS, is you could do sudo raspi tac config, and it's going to open up this GUI to kind of make it easier to configure some of the stuff. So it's just a little quick GUI tip. So you can come over here and we can do update if you don't want to do the update commands. You can do some system options, and if you want to use Wi-Fi, you can configure it here. You can change your password, your host name, whatever it might be, you could do it in here. It's just another way that's built into the Raspberry Pi OS that is a little bit easier to configure it. So like I said, it's just a little GUI tip. We can click finish, and now we're ready to pretty much start with the install. So I'm just going to split up my monitors, and then we're going to go through it. So like I said, over here on the left is just the commands to go through, and pretty much it's just a one-step install for the most part. It's just this one command, unless you do want to go a little more in depth and go through the other ones, but I've always just done it through the one command, so we're just going to paste that in here. I think I'm going to make this a little bit bigger again, and we're going to click enter. Now you can see over here that we got the Raspberry Pi logo, and now we're starting to go into the menu, so we're just going to go through here. So I'm going to click OK. Now everything's going to be done with your keyboard here. It's not going to be with a mouse anymore. They're just saying that it is a free project, but if you want to donate, here's the link. We can click OK. You're going to want to have a static IP for this box because it is going to be your DNS server, so you don't want it to change IPs and now you lose it. So in your router, just ensure that it's going to have a static lease. You could do it after we install PiHole and get that all done, but just make sure you do get it done. I'm going to click continue. This is where we're going to select our upstream DNS provider. So we are going to be using our internal DNS when we have everything set up, but we still do need to reach out to public DNS so we can resolve stuff. I like to use Cloudflare. If you want to use Google, OpenDNS, or any of the other ones, you can. But like I said, I'm going to use Cloudflare. The way that PiHole works is it uses these ad lists, as they call it, to block known domains that usually lead to ads or other kind of issues. They're just asking here if you want to use their recommended list. I'm going to say yes. I do want query login so I can look through the logs and see what's going on. And now over here is where we can kind of control some of the privacy for FTL. So it's just some of the functions that work in the back. I've always done it as show everything, so we're just going to continue with that. And now this install is going to continue going, and when we get to the next set of menus, we'll be back. So now we can see over here that the installation is complete and we can start using it. So the first thing we're going to do is note our IP. Again, make sure you make this a static lease if you haven't already. And here is going to be the site that we're actually going to access the admin page from. Next is going to be our admin password, so just make sure you have that as well, and we're going to be able to change that once we log in. So I'm just going to bump this over here. I'm going to open this back up in full screen, And now I'm just going to type in my IP. I know it says in it to use :80 for the port, but it should just be able to redirect since 80 is the default web port. The next thing we're going to do is just type in our password that it provided. And now over here you can see we are in PiHole. One more thing, because I'm going to assume everybody's going to want to change their password. If you come over here under where your password was, you can see that if we use PiHole set password, we can update it. So I can just do PiHole set password once sudo. So just do up arrow and we'll do sudo space, and then we can set a password over here and we'll just confirm it, and now it's all set. So if I do come back over here, you can see it automatically signed me out, and now I am able to log back in. So one of the first things we're going to take a look at is the dashboard. You can see there's no queries because nothing I have is currently using it, and domains on list has error -2. This is a new error for me. We do have some lists, so I'm just wondering if it's because it's just kind of a fresh install. One thing I like to do is typically head over to Firebog, and I'll have a link to this below, and this is where I get the majority of my ad list that I use. So the rule pretty much for the site is anything that has a green check and is in green is usually pretty safe to use. Anything that's blue might lead to some issues. And they actually have a legend somewhere that's going to tell you, it looks like they really refined the list. But so I'm just going to come over here and I'm just going to start copying some of these green ones. You can copy multiple at a time. If we come over here on the left to lists, this is where we can actually import some lists to use. So you can actually add multiple, but if you look over here, it does say it wants a comma. So I'll just show you, we can do this, and you can see now it's added. So now we have a URL over here in our block list. And I'll just highlight another one just because I'm lazy and I don't want to open up a text pad to put a comma in. But just to show you some of these, and this is how we would add some. Now if I come back over to my dashboard, you can see I already have 242,000 domains that are being blocked. So when I do start using this, I'm going to have some traffic being blocked. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the DHCP, and this is something that you could use as a DHCP server if you're interested in. So if you do want to use this as a DHCP server, you can check it off over here. And this is where you can indicate the range for your DHCP to lease out. So let's say you run a 192.168.50 network. Typically you're going to run from 1 to 254. Those are going to be your usable IP addresses. You probably will put about 100 addresses on your DHCP block. So you might want to use 1 to 100 as your internal network stuff, maybe your homelab or other server items, and then maybe let's say 150 to 250 be your DHCP lease. So I can come over here and I'll just say I want 150 to 192.168.50, 250, and this would be the range of addresses that are going to get leased out. This is going to be my router address and my subnet mask for my network. Typically you're going to be using a /24, which is going to use a 255.255.255.0 network. If you're somebody who's using IPv6, you can configure that over here, but I'm not, so we're just going to leave that. And we can click save and apply. And it's all set, and now you can go into your router, whether you're using like a Soho router like an Asus or one of the other ones maybe from Best Buy or Micro Center, or maybe you're using something like OpenSense or pfSense, OpenWRT, and you can indicate that your PiHole is going to be your DNS and DHCP server, and you can set that in there. From there, it will work to reach out to PiHole for not only your DNS, but also your DHCP when new devices connect to the network and say, hey, I need an address. It'll handle all of that from there. We can come back over to our dashboard again. Again, I haven't connected anything. That's why this isn't going up yet. I want to run through the dashboard pretty quickly. I'm not going to go super into detail of every area, but I'm just going to give a quick overview. Dashboard, pretty much what it looks like. When it populates with some info, we'll circle back and see what it looks like. Same thing with query log. There's nothing going on because there's no host connected to it. In group management, we can create groups to kind of separate the network up a little bit for at least DNS. So let's say you're somebody who has IoT devices, maybe smart devices. You might have children, and maybe you want their devices to be in a separate group to limit the internet access they have for web pages and similar. You might have adults, you want to let them have a little more access. Whatever it might be, you could do so here, and you could add a group. So I can call it adults. You can put a comment if you need. You can click add. Now from here, we can go over to clients, and this is where we can group up our devices for that. So as devices start to connect, you'll see more populating this, or you can go by IP address and then you can assign them to a group. We bump down again to domains. This is how we can set who we want to have access to what. So let's say we want to block certain sites for the kids. We can come over here and put whatever the URL might be. And if we have a kids group, we can come over and add that and add it to the deny domains. This will automatically block it through the network and not allow those kids' devices to those sites. Same thing if we want to allow the adults to certain sites, we can do so here. Next one is lists. We've already talked about that a little bit. Over here we have DNS control, and we can disable blocking for a time period. So there might be points where you're trying to access a site and it's not loading, or you're not able to access it. And if you want to rule out PiHole, this is a really good tool to do so. I do it pretty often when I'm trying to narrow down if the site's down or if I just can't reach it. We have our settings, which is going to go over system info, DNS, which we just talked about, DHCP, which we just talked about, the web interface and API. So if you are going to link this to maybe a dashboard or something similar, this is where you can get that. We have our privacy, where we can adjust it. Teleporter is a tool where you can back up or restore from a backup your PiHole config. So you can save your config after you get everything set, save it, and then you can keep it somewhere safe. So if something ever happens, you could restore from that config. We also have local DNS records. So being that PiHole is going to be your DNS server, when a client reaches out to a certain domain to look for it, it's going to reach the PiHole. PiHole will say, hey, I have it, here it is. So let's say I want to go to PiHole.barmine.org. I can associate the IP to that, to this PiHole right here. Click add. If I do put my computer as a client, it'll know, hey, this is how I can get to PiHole much easier. Of course, there's a few more steps, and this would be more of a CNAME because we do have some different URL to access the PiHole dashboard. Next, we have some tools. So there's diagnostics. If you're running into some issues and maybe you're going to be posting on the PiHole subreddit or the forums, this is how you can try to troubleshoot what's going on, or just normally get some logs of what might be going on. This stuff is new in the recent PiHole updates, and how you can just see the log files right from the dashboard. So these are just going through the log files. Update Gravity. So Gravity is the utility that updates the ad list. From what I know in the past, it updates automatically every Sunday, so it's not something that you really need to go in and do all the time. But if you do make some changes, you can come over here and click Update Gravity. Like if you're adding additional ad list, you're going to want to do that. If you're trying to narrow down if a domain you're trying to access is being blocked, you can actually come over here and you can search it. So maybe I want to see if msn.com is being blocked. It's just a random domain that I picked, and you can see it's not, but this is how you can kind of query your ad list to see if some site you're trying to access is being blocked. Over here we have our interfaces. So my Raspberry Pi has a few. My WLAN is down because I'm not using Wi-Fi. The loopback is always going to be up because that's how a loopback works, and then we have our one NIC for the Ethernet. We can see our information. We're all good, just some more information. And that's pretty much all of that. Now what I'm going to do is come over here and change my computer to use PiHole, and I'm going to show you that process really quickly. So the easiest way to do it is if you're on a Windows computer, you would come over to the bottom right corner, and my face is over it, so let me move that really quick. There we go. So you would come over to the bottom right corner, and you would click on your network, open network settings. Now on Windows 10, it's a little bit easier. At Windows 11, it's kind of funky, but you're going to be looking for change adapter options. It's going to open up control panel. I have a ton of different network adapters because of my setup, but pretty much you're going to be looking for something that's going to say Ethernet or local network. You're going to right click on that, click properties, and now we're going to look for Internet Protocol version 4 TCP IPv4. We're going to double click that, and here is where we can configure our DNS server. Again, my Raspberry Pi is over here at .93, so you're going to want to grab whatever that IP is. And now I'm going to just change this over to 93. I'm going to click OK, OK again, and now it should reset. If I open up a command prompt, if we do an ipconfig/all, we should be able to see what my DNS server is. So we can see over here, mine hasn't refreshed yet. So what we could do is an ipconfig/flush DNS, and I need a admin command prompt. So let me just do that really quick. So like I was saying, I just need to flush my DNS because my computer is still set to use the old one. So I could just do a flush DNS. And now we are all set. So if I do an ipconfig/all, config/all, and if we look over here, DNS server set to 93, and you can come back to your PiHole and see that the queries are starting to go up, and that's because my computer is using it. If you have more computers on the network, it's going to have a higher count. And we can come over here and start to see some of the queries that are going on. So that's how we would set up a individual computer, or maybe you want to do it on your phone. You could set it on the Wi-Fi, or what I like to do is just set it for my router so everything automatically gets it, like I was mentioning before. But that's pretty much the basics of PiHole and kind of a really quick overview of all the different options. You can see now we're starting to get some more data in these charts, and we can really see what's starting to go on. That's PiHole. That's pretty much a really brief overview of how to get it set up from start to finish and all the other options that are built into it if you want to use them. PiHole is a really great tool. Personally, I've been using it for at least 5 years, I want to say, probably the longer. And it's just been such a help to have in the network between all the ads that are pretty much on every website you go to now. I know there will be comments. No, it's not going to block YouTube ads. The best way I know to block YouTube ads is to get YouTube Premium. You don't get ads anymore. You get better playback quality, and it helps the creator that you're watching. Personally, I have YouTube Premium, and it's been the best ad block for YouTube that I've found. But yeah, that's PiHole, and I want to thank everybody for watching as always. I'll have links to all the gear down below if you want to check any of it out. I'll have a link to the PiHole page and the Raspberry Pi page if you want to look at that. I'll have a link to the Discord server if you want to join up. And as always, I want to thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next video. And as my buddy Don would say, hack till it hurts.